Every time combat sports gets brought up online, people throw around the same name, Andrew Tate, Jake Paul, and these subsequent titles get thrown around, fake fighter, fraud, rigged career. But today, I'm not here to defend Tate. I'm not here to defend Jake. I'm here to show you what an actual fraudulent fighter looks like. Because while the internet debates Andrew Tate being fraud checked and if Jake Paul has a script for all of his fights that people just don't believe he can win, this guy's fights were actually rigged. And the evidence is right here. Today we'll be reacting to Narera fight stories. Let's dive in, see what this motherfucker's talking about.
Stories of MMA's biggest fake record frauds, guys who cherry-picked and lied their way to the UFC using deceit to cover for their lack of elite level skill. But it got me thinking, if MMA can produce stories as wild as Askar Majarov and Sumit Kumar, surely a sport as corrupt and murky as boxing has also had its fair share of fake record frauds. And well, boxing absolutely did not disappoint, as in today's video we will cover the story of the most bizarre.
What the fuck is that? What is
its fair share of fake record frauds. And well, boxing
Is it me or does this dude not look real? I'm leaning towards it's real because he's got a chest tat. Unless he... Do dudes get chest implants?
Absolutely
like
did
implants?
Not disappoint. As
Surely
in today's video, we will cover the story of the most bizarre combat sports career I think I have ever seen. This video tells the story of Jorge Kahwagi, a man born into incredible wealth and power, but crippled by insecurity and a desire to step out from his father's shadow. And this desire for success of his own would lead to the fateful decision to enter the boxing ring and use his power and wealth to try and buy his way into a boxing career that he dreamt.
He looked normal there, yeah? Ain't no way
would give him the respect and accomplishment he craved. Instead, his attempt at a boxing career would bring him nothing other than ridicule and mockery, thanks to a string of blatantly rigged fights, along with his legendary fake muscle implants that ensure he remains a meme to.
Dude got fake muscle implants? No wonder he was swinging like that. It looked like the motherfucker was underwater. Bro, how insecure do you have to be to get muscle in? So if that's the case, it looks like he got him in his chest and his shoulders. Dude, that's like the Tommy Fury build before it became real with Tommy Fury.
Jorge Kahwagi Jr. grew up in circumstances that most people could only dream of. Born in 1968 in Mexico City, George was the son of the extremely powerful Jorge Kahwagi Sr., a man who had left his mark on both Mexican media and Mexican politics by owning the La Crónica newspaper and running Mexico's national chambers of commerce at one point. The young Jorge Kahwagi grew up
on the newspaper of Mexico. There is not a single narrative that's gonna get by that dude that he doesn't approve of. And look at this guy. He looks like he'd be down to do some illegal shit.
And he could have taken his life in any path that he chose. George claims his father also gave him his love of boxing, and he claims to have began training at the age of just 8. After completing his mandatory education at one of Mexico's top private schools, Kahwagi enrolled at the prestigious National Mexican University, pursuing a degree in law. While studying at UNAM, Kahwagi claims to have made his first foray into the world of amateur boxing. However, as you will see from the contents of this video, Kahwagi is a completely unreliable narrator, especially when it comes to his boxing escapades. So when he claims that he had an amateur record of...
Did you guys see that hook though? He got the elbow up and he twisted, so I mean, for having fake muscles and what seeming to be like, from the way this video is going, like no skill, he had a decent enough
43-0 with
foundation.
38
Okay.
knockouts. I find it incredibly difficult to believe, not least because we have footage of him boxing and he is genuinely awful. Unless he exclusively fought people with physical disabilities, I find 43-0 hard to believe, but I guess it doesn't really matter. Despite apparently being a boxing
Unless he's fighting somebody with physical disabilities. Yeah, fucking hell, man. This is, bro. But honestly, Mexico being like one of the epicenters of boxing runs so deep in their culture. I mean, some shit like this is bound to, you know, mix its way in.
Kahwagi would instead
Damn,
focus on
dude.
education, getting his degree in law and also getting a degree in business administration from a different Mexican university. Predictably, Kahwagi would then manage to land a job at his father's La Cronica media company, quickly rising through the ranks, and before long, he was vice president and earning a hefty salary at a very young age. When he wasn't working, Kahwagi was out in Mexico City rubbing shoulders with fellow elites, and he was considered something of a socialite, with elite connections no doubt aided by his father's ability to get doors opened for his son. And Kahwagi would continue to tread the same path as his father when he opted to make his move into politics. With his father already well connected politically, Kahwagi Jr. was able to secure himself a seat in Mexico's lower Congress as a member of the Green Party. But his political career seems to have been very uneventful, with the only notable event from his time in politics being when he asked for time off from his job in office so that he could enter Mexico's version of Big Brother. Kahwagi was allowed to enter the show.
Ain't that some Trump shit? Let me pause my political responsibilities of running the government so I could go be on a TV show. I mean, can we hate though? I mean, shit. Sometimes this shit's fun. I'm sure those jobs.
And he would end up spending
suck
50
the life out of
days
you,
in the
man.
Big Brother house, finishing in 3rd place. Not exactly the actions of a politician serious about improving the life of those he was supposed to be serving, but Kahwagi enjoyed the boost in profile that the show was able to provide him. Perhaps unsurprisingly, however, his lofty political ambitions were taking longer to achieve than he had initially anticipated, with his father's influence only able to take him so far in politics. And by his early 30s, he hadn't been able to make any real inroads into a more prestigious position. From the outside looking in, it seemed like Kahwagi had everything going for him. He was rich, he was powerful, he was well connected, and he had achieved some level of fame. But on the inside, Kahwagi was a man crippled by insecurity and an overarching sense of a lack of real achievement, perhaps feeling that everything in his life was a direct result of his father's influence and power. This crippling insecurity would manifest itself in various ways.
That shit happens though to a lot of people. You get cast into a family with a very high profile, successful dad. Yeah, that pressure goes down on you, man. Luckily, I didn't have to worry about that. My dad was a manager of a mall, so unless I was gonna go run the family business, which just walking around the mall, managing it. I can't relate, but like Michael Jordan's son, Marcus. I mean, Bronny, kind of in some sense. It's kind of unfortunate, man. A lot of those kids
One
don't
of
really
which
get
being
to
the
follow their own
plastic surgery
dreams.
Kahwagi would opt for over the years, slowly altering his appearance until he reached the point of ridiculousness. But this insecurity would also be the impetus for the next career change Kahwagi would undergo, as he made the fateful decision to pursue a career in professional boxing, despite being in his early 30s and having not trained seriously since his university days. And I'm not even sure if he trained seriously back then either. In Kawagi's mind, a glittering career in boxing was the perfect way of achieving something independent of his father in a sport deeply entrenched in Mexican culture. The respect and admiration he hoped to achieve in the ring would also bring the added benefit of perhaps reigniting his career in politics, with the public enamored by the man who could just do it all. On paper, the plan seemed perfect, but there was just one issue. Jorge Kahwagi is a genuinely terrible boxer, and no amount of money spent on training and sparring could change the fact that he was not capable of competing at a professional level.
So you guys all want to shit on Tate, which I'm not a Tate fan, y'all. So, but like Andrew Tate, at least like he was fighting. Like he may have been a can crusher. He may have been, put against guys who, were just there for the check. They just got to last the 30-second men and, they get their $50. But man, this is an actual fraudulent fighter. Like, this is the shit people should be outraged about. This is ridiculous. But would, if I would totally keep up with this if this guy was still going. Which he may
So
be. I don't
George
know.
Kahwagi
Hopefully he
decided to
mentions that
spend
at
his
the end of the
money
video.
on buying off his opponents, embarking on a career defined by fraud and disgrace. By the time Kahwagi would make his professional boxing debut, he was 32 years old. This is an age where some fighters are actually beginning to wind down their career, but Kahwagi believed he was still young enough to build himself a career in the sport that would earn him the respect and admiration he so desperately desired. Or did he believe that he was still young enough to compete? Because his actions from the outset of his career suggest he knew exactly just how bad he was, and he would do anything to cover it up. The one saving grace of Kawagi's reputation that prevents this embarrassing and cringeworthy fraud from being more widely well known is the lack of available information and in particular footage of his early fights due to the time period.
Man, fights overseas in Mexico and Thailand and a lot of places. Yeah, dude, that shit is so spotty. That's why people like Andrew Tate have been able to inflate their record. I think it's only recorded like 30 or 40, maybe 50 fights, but then Andrew himself is like, yeah, I'm 75-11 or like an 80-12. Just some ridiculous shit. But when you go into these other promotions in these different countries that don't have any sanctioning body, there's nobody keeping track. It's like, yeah, man, you can really get a nice record being out there
They
because
took place
typically
in,
the shit
with
never
Kawagi's debut
happens.
taking place all the way back in 2001. This lack of footage is an issue that was remedied later in his career, but most of his early bouts unfortunately do not seem to have any video. Kawagi's pro boxing career began in November of 2001.
Like, surely they don't have sanctioning bodies, but he was holding the WBC belt. And it's like, surely, even back then, they wouldn't let this dude fight with fucking shoulder implants and pec implants. Like,
With a fight booked
I'm
against his
just
fellow
disturbed.
debutant in Perry Williams. Kawagi would start his career off with a bang with a first round knockout in what seemed like an easy debut against an overmatched opponent to get the wheels rolling on his career. In reality, however, this fight was anything but simple. His opponent on the night in
Age
Perry
is
Williams
not
would go
known.
on to have one more professional fight, losing again before finding himself embroiled in an FBI investigation codenamed Operation Matchbook, which alleged he had been paid to lose his second fight, with his opponent in Joey Torres being an undercover FBI informant. This investigation included an alleged wiretap in which an official from Top Rank Boxing instructed Perry on which punch he should go down from. Perry Williams was banned from boxing and would never fight again. It's worth noting that his fight against Kahwagi was
What the fuck? That's actual fraudulent shit. Like, I just don't see any type of this sort of thing going on in the United States. I'm sorry. Like, we get calls wrong, the judges fuck up, the sanctioning bodies, try to take money out fighters' purses, for no reason. But this is fraudulent shit, dude. And like, why would you go to this length? Like,
not
it seems
part
like
of the
dude's already
FBI
rich.
investigation. But if he was paid off in his only other pro bout, then it's definitely feasible that a man as rich and desperate as Kahwagi also chucked him a bribe before their fight. And if it seems harsh to assume the worst for Kahwagi, that's only because I know what's coming later. And once you've heard the full story, I'm sure you will agree that on the balance of probability, Kawagi's first ever fight was a complete fix. Kawagi's debut win over Perry Williams was followed up by another first-round knockout, this time of Darryl Brown, becoming the only man to ever knock Darryl Brown out in his 9-fight career, with Brown deciding to never fight again after feeling the power of Kahwagi. In just Kawagi's third ever fight, the vacant Mexican cruiserweight title was on the line against a fighter with an 0-4 career record. Now that might seem dodgy, and it probably was, but in fairness, there's not a ton of Mexican cruiserweights to begin with. Unsurprisingly, Kahwagi would win the Mexican Cruiserweight Championship.
Okay, I don't know if I agree with that. Boxing is huge in Mexico. You know, there are Hispanic people of all sizes. I don't know if I agree with that. This dude, I mean, this guy making this video has nailed it. The research he's done and how it's all put together is super entertaining, very, very well done. But I don't know if I agree with that. Let me know what you guys think. Is that true? Does Mexico not have a lot of
For the third time in a row,
cruiserweights?
he knocked his opponent out in the very first round. His opponent on the night, in George Lopez, would never fight again, retiring with a 0-5 career record. For the next two bouts of his burgeoning career, Kahwagi would head over to Spain to fight. Firstly, picking up yet another first round knockout in an uninteresting bout against a fighter with a career record of 0-1. However, his second fight in Spain was interesting, because his opponent in Richard Wilson just so happened to be another fighter who was later wrapped up in the FBI's Operation Matchbook as a fighter suspected of throwing fights. A consistent loser with a career record of 13 wins and 64 losses.
Look at this, guys. 13-64. Credit to him, though. Only 14 of those 64s he was knocked out. Fucking hell. And this guy is supposedly from the U.S. Richard Williams. And honestly, this isn't even the worst, fight record I've seen. But it's still pretty bad. It's still pretty bad. I mean, dude, out of those 13 KOs, he's got 3.
Wilson was knocked out by Kahwagi in the very first round of their fight. There is no hard evidence that this fight with Kahwagi was rigged, but to share another bout with a man strongly suspected of throwing fights was a bad look. But with a shiny 5-0 record and a 100% first round knockout rate, Kahwagi was ready for a step up in competition, and he was duly handed it by the WBC, who offered him a shot at the vacant WBC International Cruiserweight title against Alexei Osokin of Russia. Osokin was a fighter with a record of 11 wins and 14 losses at the time of the Kahwagi fight, and he was certainly nothing special. But with one of the WBC's 5 million belts being on the line, it was the perfect incentive for Kahwagi to make sure he got the job done. This fight took place in Russia, and unsurprisingly, Kawagi's unstoppable power was too much for Osokin, who crumbled in the very first round. And with that, Jorge Kahwagi was your WBC International Cruiserweight Champion. But it brings me great pleasure to tell you that Kahwagi and Osokin would decide that after such an epic bout, they had to run it back and do a rematch. And thankfully, footage of their fight in Mexico City does exist, although I must warn you, the quality is terrible. But you don't need 1080p to appreciate the pure punching power of Jorge Kahwagi. In a truly dreadful fight, Osokin first goes down from a pathetically weak punch, but realizes it looked too suspicious to be a knockdown and tries to wave it off unsuccessfully. After somehow surviving the ref's count, the bout continues until Kahwagi stops the show with a savage blow that sends Osokin flying theatrically as if he was just hit by prime Mike Tyson, with the fight waved off after he failed to beat the count. Given just how embarrassing this fight looked, it's fair to assume this fight was rigged. Their first fight in Russia was also probably rigged, and I suspect every bout Kahwagi ever competed in was fixed. His boxing career...
He literally got busted up from a fake fight. A predetermined fight. What the actual fuck? Jesus Christ. And you know what? Just watching that little clip, his opponent had a decent foundation. Like, you can kind of see kind of what a fighter is going to be like. Those first couple, really 30, 45 seconds. See how they move. See where their feet go. See kind of where their hands land. The other guy looked like he had been doing it for a while. This is
complete
trash,
joke to anyone unlucky enough to be in attendance for one of his fights. And I use the term fight very loosely. But his most embarrassing moments in the ring were still yet to come. as Kahwagi seemingly lacked any level of shame to sense how bad things could get if more people saw how fake his fights were. Mexican boxing fans are way too smart to be fooled by something that looks as bad as these fights, and his attempt at a boxing career was never going to bring him the plaudits Kahwagi was hoping for. Perhaps it was the embarrassment of the last fight that...
What the fuck is this? What the fuck is this? What is this? I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt that maybe the photographer is over here a little bit more, but he's just posing right here. But even if if this guy is trying to get in stance and he's directly in front of the photographer, what is this hand doing? What is this right hand doing? The left hand is out. Right hand is right here. How did he get that far?
Would lead Kahwagi to seek out a more impressive opponent for his next bout, hoping to buy some legitimacy on the back of his next opponent's credentials. The opponent in question, Buck Smith, is an interesting character in his own right. His remarkable career saw him compete in an extraordinary 205 bouts, with countless more exhibitions not counted on his record.
Buck Smith.
Of these 205 fights, he would win 183 of them, and treated boxing like a 9 to 5, taking bouts as regularly as possible, even if it meant fighting truly terrible competition all across America. By the time Buck Smith was contacted by Jorge Kahwagi for a fight, Buck was 37 years old and his career was definitely on the tail end, with 5 losses in a row, including one against Julio Cesar Chavez 4 years prior. Even though his career was approaching the end, surely Buck would be a serious problem for someone as bad as Jorge Kahwagi. Had Kahwagi bitten off more than he could chew in Buck Smith? Well, Kahwagi would surprise, or maybe not surprise people, by knocking Buck Smith out in just 1 round, just like every other opponent he had fought so far. It took Julio Cesar Chavez 3 rounds to get Buck Smith out of the ring when they'd fought, but Kawagi's unstoppable power had been just too much. Had Father Time truly caught up to Buck Smith, or was there something more nefarious at play here? Footage of the fight doesn't seem to exist, so I guess we will never know for sure. But in all of Buck Smith's 200 plus fights, Kahwagi was the first and only man to knock him out in less than 3 rounds. Impressive, I guess. In an unrelated note, Buck Smith was yet another figure later caught up in the FBI's Operation Matchbook investigation into match fixing in boxing, and he was called to testify before a grand jury in 2004. Buck has strenuously denied ever taking part in rigged fights, but it's yet another Kahwagi opponent who fought suspiciously bad against Kahwagi before later being accused of throwing fights. Just a funny coincidence, I guess.
Athletes that cheat, like professional athletes that cheat, this is like, it's so fucked, dude. It's so fucked. Like, zero respect for the sport, your fellow fighters. Like, it's like, man, like when that NBA gambling situation happened, just like, what was it, last summer with Chauncey Billups and a couple other guys dealing with the fucking mafia. It's like, man, like, bro, it's a sport at the end of the day, but there's so much money that's gotten involved. It's like, it's inevitable. It's led in so many bad actors, especially in boxing. Boxing's been corrupt for fucking since it became a sport. But yeah, man, you hate to hear about this shit, man. This fucking Kahwagi guy or whatever.
After
he
beating
got
Buck
some
Smith,
serious
Kahwagi
bread.
would have 2 more fights in Mexico, of course winning both via KO, although these wins came in the second round rather than the first round. The first time in his career that Kahwagi had ever been out of the first round. With Kahwagi at a 10-0 record as of 2004, we had footage of just 1 fight, and even that appears to have only surfaced in recent years. Kahwagi wasn't fooling any boxing fans into thinking he was a legit fighter, but to the uneducated, he was possibly able to fool them into thinking he was a politician, businessman, and fighter extraordinaire, because he'd beaten decent opponents like Buck Smith and had a glitzy record of first round knockouts and a few title belts that he could show off. Unfortunately for Kahwagi, however, he couldn't quit while he was ahead, and his next 2 fights would unfortunately for him have footage. And they would completely and utterly torpedo any credibility he had been able to build, exposing him as one of boxing's biggest ever frauds and making him a laughingstock in boxing circles to this very day. Age 37, Kahwagi had bought himself a 10-0 record and had won belts like the WBC Latino Cruiserweight title and the WBC International Cruiserweight title. He was never going to go down in history like Canelo, but given he was a truly awful boxer, his money had managed to buy him a boxing career that looked better on paper than the vast majority of those who get into the sport. At this stage, he should have just called it quits. And really, there were only downsides to taking more fights. But Kawagi's ego would not let him walk away, and he decided to take another fight in 2005, and unbelievably, he told the media that he still believed he could win a world title. But this fight would provide the best evidence yet of how fraudulent his boxing career truly was, with footage of this fight existing, as well as journalist accounts of how the fight played out, along with the reaction of those unlucky enough to watch this sham unfold in front of their eyes. The fight was booked for July 2005 against experienced practitioner Roberto Coelho, a man who would be fighting in his 50th pro bout. His record of 33 wins and 17 losses wasn't spectacular, but it was decent enough. However, his career was definitely coming to an end, having won just 2 of his last 12 fights as he entered his late 30s. A boxer on the downslide and heading towards retirement looking for one last payday was the perfect target for Kahwagi, and a bout between the pair was organised as the co-main event of a fight card being held in Baja California in Mexico, with Kahwagi looking to chart a course to a world title. From the admittedly poor quality footage that exists, we can see Coelho control the first round while Kahwagi swings wildly and misses in dramatic fashion, with shocking form over and over again. Coelho was perhaps unaware of just how bad Kahwagi was, and it seems it took him a little bit to figure out how difficult it would be to look like he got legitimately beaten by someone this bad. It is genuinely comical at times, and I think Coelho almost forgot his assignment, as he looked to be having fun dodging Kawagi's pathetically telegraphed swings while landing a few punches of his own. As the first round ended, the fans, almost all of whom were seeing Kahwagi fight for the first time, were left bewildered by what they had witnessed, as he looked like a fish out of water. But in the break between rounds, it seems Coelho was reminded of what was expected of him, and in the second round, he suspiciously completely stopped throwing punches of any real intention, allowing Kahwagi to desperately unload punches on him at will, before Coelho threw himself to the floor.
God.
It was now abundantly clear to everyone watching that this fight was a complete fix, and as Coelho bravely made his way back to his feet to beat the count, the fans in attendance began throwing objects in the ring and voicing their discontent at the nonsense they'd paid to watch. Kahwagi showed his imperious power to drop Coelho again, and as objects poured into the ring from a furious crowd, Kahwagi was declared the winner of this shambolic fight. Both boxers were booed.
Shambolic? Shambolic. Let me know in the comments. Have you heard that word? That's a new one to me.
Fraud and continuing to pelt them with objects. Kahwagi would attempt to explain away the weird nature of the fight by saying he had 14 stitches in his mouth and injuries to his nose and hand that had stopped him from performing his best. But that did nothing to satisfy critics, with one Mexican boxing official urging Kahwagi to stop boxing for the sake of the sport and the fans. This fight had finally generated him a decent level of publicity, but it was all the wrong publicity, and he had been properly exposed as a complete fraud, with the grainy footage there to prove it. This fight should have been the last time we ever saw Kahwagi grace the boxing ring, given the man was 37 years old and had completely blown all credibility with the disgrace of his last fight. And for many years it looked like we had seen the last of him. But Kahwagi is not a normal person, and the same insecurities and hunger for real achievement that had drawn him to the ring in the first place would inexplicably draw him back for one last fight. And the craziest part is, this fight took place 10 years after the fiasco with Coelho, with Kahwagi making the crazy decision to come back to boxing in 2015 at the age of 47.
Look how much work it looks like has been done to this dude's face. This is... It's disturbing. Disturbing.
And once again, there was no hiding from the cameras as Kahwagi had done earlier in his career, as this fight was to be shown live on TV. With his reputation in Mexican boxing shot to bits, unsurprisingly, Kawagi's return to the ring would come outside of his home country. An event taking place in Cebu City in the Philippines had an exciting last-minute addition when it was announced that Jorge Kahwagi and Roman Olivas would be fighting in a cruiserweight bout, something of a novelty in the Philippines which rarely sees cruiserweight action. This was by no means a noteworthy fight card, and it would have gone completely forgotten if not for the last-minute addition of this Kahwagi bout, which will live on forever in infamy. God only knows the motivations of Kahwagi for deciding to do this fight. Perhaps the embarrassment of his last fight being captured on film and the ridicule it generated meant he wanted a more legitimate looking fight to try and recapture some level of dignity. But if that was his aim, he failed miserably. This fight was ridiculous before the bell had even rung, with Kahwagi sporting extremely large muscles befitting a bodybuilder rather than a fighter. But this was no result of steroids. Kahwagi had made the inexplicable decision to get fake muscle implants, which when combined with the plastic surgery he'd gotten on his face, made him look like a cartoon character. Unfortunately, the self-image issues that he dealt with seemed to have escalated to an extreme.
You know how many amateurs, you know how many people on Misfits would fuck this dude up? Like if you're this dude's chick, how are you walking around confidently with this guy? Like what the actual fuck?
Level, and the ridiculousness of the muscle implants would be made more apparent when it came time for Kahwagi to actually move about and throw some punches. Kahwagi seemed to have such little control of his movement as a result of the implants, and he could barely move to the point you could hear the crowd audibly laughing at the absurdity of what they were watching.
Yep. I've seen enough. Yeah, so that's a real fraudulent fighter. Shout out to Narara Fight Stories. This video was great. I'll put his channel link in the description so you guys can go check it out. He's got a couple other really good videos on there. Yeah, man, this is brutal. Let me know what you guys think, man. Like this, does this change anything for any of you that call like Tate or Jake or any of those guys fake fighters? Because this is a real fake fighter, and I'm not like standing up for them. You know, they got their own shit that they do to kind of swing things in their direction. Not predetermined though, and no money is being paid off. Let me just make that clear. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. Let me know if you guys think you could beat this dude's ass too. I'm thinking I could, especially with these muscle implants. I mean, God, how weird. Anyways, let me know what you guys think down in the comments. I'm Archer, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Deuce.